Paris. That's what I'm going to talk about tonight. This picture is about Paris. Paris in the interbellum, the period between the two world wars, the 20s and the 30s. And in that time, Paris was the center of the world, especially in the domains of arts and architecture, literature, dance, photography, theater. Every artist or architect or creative human being that had some ambition wanted to go to Paris. And they all did. On this picture you see Matisse, Dali, Picasso, Mondrian, Van Doesburg, Ernest Hemingway, Man Ray, Jean Cocteau, and Gertrude Stein, among many, many others. And they all wanted to be a part of that big center of the world in Paris and part of the discussion that was going on there. Among them also this young architect from Switzerland over there, Charles-Édouard Jeanneret, went to Paris to become the most important architect of the 20th century. And he immediately took a central role in the discussion about architecture. He met Amédée aux Enfants, an artist that already lived in Paris, and they started a magazine, L'Esprit Nouveau. They edited about 30 issues, I believe. And in this magazine, they published their ideas about architecture and about art. And more, Jeanneret, who later called himself Le Corbusier, of course, everybody knows that, took over the editions of this magazine. But before that, he designed his first house in Paris, his first white maison, his first white villa, for his friend Amédée aux Enfants. But later on, he published his ideas and all his essays that he published in L'Esprit Nouveau in this book, the first really important book on modern architecture in the world, Verre une architecture, in which he showed that he was really inspired by airplanes, by automobiles, by cruise ships, and he felt that houses should be a machine to live in. He didn't like the traditional house anymore, but he proclaimed that houses should be a machine to live in, an instrument that you could suture yourself and live in a modern way. And he thought of some rules by which you could design modern houses, the 5 points of architecture. Also, he showed how you could design a plan and how you could design a house or a villa. He showed that with 4 of his own villas as example. Le Corbusier designed a lot of villas in Paris. You see a few of them over here. And some more villas. Not only in Paris, this one is Maison Laguillette in Antwerp. Maison Cook, Maison Bezot in Tunis. And the rest of them is in Paris. Villa Stein at the bottom. He also designed a neighborhood near Bordeaux, in Pessac. And on this picture you can see that although everybody calls this period in Le Corbusier's oeuvre his white villas and his white period, the villas were not white at all at first. In Pessac they had all kinds of typical Le Corbusier colors, but also his villas in Paris at first had all kinds of colors. But later on they became white, and now we know them as white villas, and most of them today are white. This design of these villas with this theory of 5 points of architecture in mind caused a big discussion with his former employer, Auguste Perret. Auguste Perret thought that was a very bad idea. He wanted windows that have windows from floor to ceiling. In his mind, that would give much more freedom of feeling, and you would have much more a spatial feeling, a spatial contact with the surrounding of your house. This is an apartment building that Auguste Perret erected in the same time as Le Corbusier constructed all his white villas. And from the inside out, you see what Perret meant by windows, vertical windows. At the same time, the middle architect on the picture I should just show you was Rob Mallet-Stevens. He was a very sophisticated architect. This street, for example, on the right side, was bought. There was an area bought by a few clients of him that all asked him to design their house in that street, and that street is now called the Rue Mallet-Stevens in Paris. But he was especially known for his big mansions outside Paris, and especially the Villa Cavois in 1931. Very spectacular house. It's not a real modernist house, it's more Art Deco, but nevertheless it's very worthwhile to visit it. There were other artists that built their home and that built houses, modern houses in Paris. For example, Theo Van Doesburg, who built this house and atelier for himself in Meudon, on the outskirts of Paris. Le Corbusier not only designed white villas, but he also designed, just as I just showed you in Pessac, big urban planning schemes with big housing blocks, for example this one. And in the Exposition des Arts Décoratifs in 1925, he wanted to show his big urban schemes, but the organizer of the exhibition didn't like that, so they gave him a little plot on the backside of the Grand Palais where this exhibition was organized, and he was then allowed to build there his model. This was the house, but next to it there was a round exhibition space in which he showed his big urban schemes, and one of them was this plan, which is called the Plan Voisin. And in this plan he wanted to demolish the center of Paris around the Halle, and he wanted to replace it by these huge apartment skyscrapers. And the question is, why did he name that plan the Plan Voisin? The main industry in the beginning in the 20th century is the automobile industry. So he went to the director of Citroën and he asked him to sponsor his work and his research on modern architecture. But after a while they refused. So this house, this system of houses, which he eventually called Citroën, he later changed the name to Citroën because Citroën refused to sponsor him. Then he went to Renault and to Peugeot, and they all refused. But at the end, he went to the brothers Voisin. They had an industry in aeroplanes, which failed, and then they started to build automobiles. This was, by the way, the only built prototype of the Citroën system in the Weissenhof Siedlung in Stuttgart. But he managed to interest the brothers Voisin to finance his plans, because he needed 25,000 French francs to build his pavilion Esprit Nouveau for the exhibition that I just showed you. And they financed it, and that's why he named his plan the Plan Voisin. On top of that, he got them interested in donating him a car, the Voisin C7, and Le Corbusier promised them to show this car in all the photographs and all the publications of his white villas. And that's what he did exactly. In that way, he could show them that the 20th century was a very modern period with modern cars and modern houses. But when you take a good look at this picture, then you can see that the car is still an old-fashioned stagecoach with a motor in it, and the villa looks like a just landed spaceship. Here you see some more photographs of the Villa Stein, and everywhere this car is shown. He was quite proud of his voisin. He drove it all over Europe, and the car by Le Corbusier had a lot of bolts and scratches and so on, and he didn't mind. He drove his car like a madman, and later on, at the end of the 30s, he sold it and bought a Fiat. Le Corbusier also designed his own minimum voiture, his own minimum car, which is this one. And he was not the only architect that designed automobiles. This is a motor car, an automobile that was designed by Adolf Loos. These designs are by Frank Lloyd Wright. This one is by Walter Gropius. All the architects that designed automobiles in the 30s, they didn't design the technique, they just designed the carrosserie, the styling of the automobile, especially this one. This is one by Jean Prouvé, and this is one by Buckminster Fuller, of course, who was really an experimental designer. It was a three-wheel car that could make very sharp turns in its route. You will see it in a few seconds. It's really amazing what that car can do. It was also very easy to park it, as you can see. And it could drive very, very, very fast. Here you see Buckminster Fuller at the wheel, with his family inside. No hands. But he got a ticket for speeding. Take a look how he can park the car. How easy that is. So it was a very experimental, very advanced car. Unfortunately, he only made 3 prototypes of it, but unfortunately his wife and one of his childs died in a car accident, and then he stopped producing them. The Deux Chevaux, made by Boulanger, another minimum voiture, just as the one that Corbusier produced. Joseph Amberton in England designed the automobile. And after the World War II, Carlo Molino designed racing cars. Joe Ponti in Italy designed automobiles. Norman Foster designed buses. And this is a prototype for BMW that was designed by one of the leading architects these days. And there were also Dutch architects that designed automobiles. I mean, they bought an automobile and then they started changing it. Another grille, other lamps, other wheel plates. On the left you see an Amilcar, which is a French brand that was owned by Leen van der Vlucht, the German of the Rotterdam architect of the Van Elle factory. And then on the right you see a Cleveland car that was owned by Jan Duiker. In Lille lived the family Pierre et Eugénie d'Alsace. Madame d'Alsace, Eugénie d'Alsace, asked her husband for a weekend house at the outskirts of Paris, and Pierre bought 7 hectares of land 30 kilometers to the west of Paris in Poissy, on which they asked Le Corbusier to design them a weekend house. And he did. It was a villa on a hill that overlooked the valley and the Seine River. and he designed this house for them. It was especially designed for the views towards the river. And on the rest of those 7 hectares, Madame d'Alsace planted fruit trees and had orchards. And because of her son that suffered from tuberculosis, the only remedy for tuberculosis in that time was as much sun as you could get and as much fresh air as you could get. So she lived for the whole summer with her son in this weekend house. Today the house is, 80 years old, so all the trees around it grow and the view is almost gone. Only from the top floor you have a little view towards the Seine and the valley. But nevertheless the house was constructed. It was, the commission took place in 1928 and in 1930 they started construction and it was finished in 1932. A lot of people believe that it was a house in concrete, in enforced concrete, but as you can clearly see it was not. Only the floors were made of concrete and the walls were made of just simple brickwork. Le Corbusier made at least 4 different plans for the house. The ground floor was only meant for cars, so they could park their cars in here. There was a little place for the driver of the cars, for the bedrooms for the maids and a washing room. The first floor had a big living room over there, kitchen over there, guest bedroom, a bedroom for the son, a bedroom for the couple, and a study for the lady of the house, and a big patio. And the top floor was just a solarium and a sun deck. But the main feature of the house was, of course, this ramp in the middle of the house, which gave it a very special spatial quality. This is an image from the patio to the main living room, from the living room to the patio, the staircase for the servants, and the bathroom of the master bedroom. There was also a little house near the entrance gate for the gardener. Le Corbusier was very proud of this house. He showed it in the first very important main international exhibition that was organized in the Museum of Modern Art in New York in 1932 by Philip Johnson. In the model that is still in the possession of the Museum of Modern Art, it also had those typical Corbusier colors as they are visible, as they are shown in the model. But it was probably never painted in that way because there are no pictures and there are no elements that show that it has ever been there. Did the d'Alsace family like this house? No, they didn't, because it leaked from the very first day that they received the key of the door and that they lived in it. But in 1940, when the Second World War started, they wanted to leave Paris and they lived in the house for about a year, and then they moved to the south of France, and the house was taken over by the Germans, and later on after 44 by the Canadians, and they ruined it a little bit. So after the World War II, it looked like this, the house, and Madame d'Alsace started to renovate it little by little. In 1950, her husband died, and then she went on living there permanently with her son Roger. In 1938, the Ford Motor Company wanted to sell motor cars and automobiles in Europe, so they erected a big plant on the outskirts of Poissy, and it was never used, but after 1945, the plant was taken over by Simca Motor Company, and they started on a large scale to build automobiles in Poissy. And in order to be able to do that, they needed laborers and they needed houses for the laborers. So the whole area behind the villa was filled up with large housing blocks, and the authorities of Poissy claimed that they needed those 7 hectares of the Poissy villa to build schools and shopping malls on this area. So they took away the land of the family. Only a small plot around the villa was was kept. And in 1955 they also wanted the villa to demolish it and to build a gymnasium on their land. But Madame d'Alsace didn't want to sell her house, so she warned Corbusier, take care because they want to demolish our house. And Le Corbusier immediately took action. He mobilized the Minister of Culture, André Malraux, at the time, and they managed to prevent the demolition of the house. The family sold the house to the city of Poissy, and in 1963, I believe, the first renovation took place, as you can see over here. Today it's been renovated at least 3 times, and today it looks like this. This is Pierre Chareau. He was born in 1887. He was mainly a designer of furniture, at first in wood, later in wood and steel, and at last only in steel. He designed very interesting furniture because it was not fixed furniture, but they all could be changed to the needs of the person that owned them, and you could use them in all kinds of different ways. He was married to his cousin, Mrs. Dolly Chareau, and when she was 18 years old, she started teaching English language, and her first pupil was Annie Bernheim. When Annie Bernheim married Dr. Jean Welz, they became more and more friends, the two couples. And when the couple d'Alsace moved to Paris, they asked the husband of her teacher to design their apartment at the Champs-Élysées. That, of course, was Pierre Chareau. And in 1928, they wanted more space, and they bought a house on an inner courtyard on the Rive Gauche in Paris, in the Rue Saint-Guillaume. This is the block. This is the house, seen from the front, and this is the back side. And they wanted to demolish it to build something new over there, but there was a tenant on the 2nd floor that didn't want to leave, so they couldn't demolish this house. So they had to refurbish it and build a new house only on the ground floor and the 1st floor underneath, and that's what they did. But they didn't bother fitting the new house in. They just made their own. They just realized their own fantasy. Pierre Chareau, in principle, was a furniture designer. So if you talk about houses of living in houses as machines, as Le Corbusier wanted, this is a real machine, an instrument that you can change and accommodate to your everyday changing needs. This is the back elevation of the house. So it was a quite dark surrounding, and that's why the house was completely erected in glass blocks type Nevada. The house has 3 floors. The parterre was used by the doctor for his office and his patients. The 1st floor was the main living room, and the 2nd floor had bedrooms. This is really a plan libre. Huh? Every floor is different, and it's really an instrument to live in. Really designed as very refined in steel and glass, as pieces of furniture that were put together. A lot of parts could move. Here you have screens that were closed during the daytime when the doctor welcomed his patients, and in the evening and in the weekends these screens were opened and you could go to the main living area. The d'Alsace family had a very intense social life. They organized all kinds of meetings and receptions and lectures in here. They were left-wing socialists in Paris. But the house has a very surprising spatial quality that you wouldn't expect when you enter the building. Chareau also designed most of the furniture in the house. He had separate columns by which the lighting switches were fixed on. Special staircases that were open and made out of steel, so they wouldn't fill up the space. Here a drawing and a photograph of the master bathroom with all kind of closets that could move. You could close them, you could open them, you could turn it, you could take out the drawers. Here we have the bathrooms of the children's bedrooms. Pierre Chareau didn't design and build his house by himself. He had the help of two colleagues. One of them was Bernard Bijvoet. Bijvoet was a Dutch architect. And the third one is Louis Barillet, and Louis Barillet was a blacksmith. And those three people practically lived for 4 years on this building site. Chareau made sketches and came up with the ideas. Bernard Bijvoet was a Dutch architect, a real architect educated at the university in Delft. He made all the drawings and all the technical details, and Louis Barillet was a furniture blacksmith, and he produced all the building elements and all the furniture in the house. Chareau, Bijvoet and Louis Barillet. Why was there a Dutch architect involved? Bernard Bijvoet was a Dutch architect, and he was born in The Hague, and he went to the university in Delft, and there he met Jan Duiker. They had the same age, and they immediately became close friends. And after they graduated from their study in Delft, they decided to start an architects firm together, and they started participating in competitions, and they won almost the first one, which was a competition for an Academy of Arts in the center of Amsterdam. It was meant to be really built. So they got a big award because for their first prize, and that gave them the opportunity to start their practice. And they bought 3 houses, 3 detached houses next to one another in Zandvoort. The first one was taken over by Duiker and his family. The second one was used by Bernard Bijvoet and his family, and the third one was used for their architectural practice. They published this plan all over Europe, especially in France. Duiker and Bijvoet really got popular and famous in France. They are mostly known for their building Sanatorium Zonnestraal. In 1925 they were told that their design for the Academy of Arts was not going to be built, so that gave him immediately financial problems. And another thing happened. Duiker fell in love with the wife of his brother-in-law, and so he divorced and moved over to Amsterdam. So they didn't have a practice anymore, and they had nothing much to do. Now Bernard Bijvoet, who had a lot of friends at that time in France, and he was a real Francophile, so he moved to Paris to see if he could find some work over there, and he did. At first he worked for Rob Mallet-Stevens, and later on for Chareau. At first they constructed this golf pavilion and a villa in Beauvallon in the south of France, and later on they worked on the Maison de Verre. And Bernard Bijvoet, being a real architect, a real educated architect, made all the drawings. He made these drawings of the preliminary design of the Maison de Verre. And probably Chareau could never have built this house if he didn't have the help of Bernard Bijvoet. Chareau went to America in 1940 because in the 30s he couldn't hardly get any work. But also over there he didn't have much work, and he died in 1950. And in 1945 this monograph was published, and it is a very peculiar publication of the Maison de Verre, because it was shown in this way. The apartment on the second floor is gone. In the front elevation as well as in the back elevation. So this really meant that the house was to be a detached new house. The Maison de Verre had great influence in France on other architects, especially on Le Corbusier, because Le Corbusier lived in a small apartment just to the north of Boulevard Saint-Germain in the Rue Jacob, and his office was in the beginning of the Rue de Sèvres, near the Bon Marché. So every day, when Le Corbusier walked from his house to his office, he passed by the Maison de Verre. And Le Corbusier had the habitude of making paintings in the morning. He painted in the mornings, and he went to his architect's office in the afternoon. So every day around noon, as Mrs. Dalzas mentioned, he passed by, and a lot of the times he went in the gate and he see what was going on. And he got very influenced by Chareau's way of designing architecture, and from that period on, also Le Corbusier made black-colored steel structures filled in with glass blocks, as you can see in this apartment building, of which he owned the penthouse, as you can see in this building for the Salvation Army from the same period, or this housing block, Le Clarté in Genève. The Maison de Verre was kept in the family for a very long time. Mr. and Mrs. Dalzas lived there all their lives. Later on, their children, they bought the apartment on the second floor, and their daughter lived there all her life, but they passed away as well in the early 2000s. So their heirs didn't know to do with this house, so they thought they'd best sell it, and they offered the house to the state of France to be a museum, but the state of France was not interested in organizing a museum in this house. Then they offered it to the city of Paris. They were not interested as well. And what they then did, unfortunately, they auctioned most of the furniture, and they sold the house with the broker. And happily, it was bought by this man, Robert Rubin. He was an American investor in the stock exchange, and he made a fortune over there. And then he sold his company and started studying architecture history. Other houses were designed and built, because all the white villas in the Maison de Verre turned out to be very popular in France. This house was designed by André Wojcinski. He was Le Corbusier's chef de bureau after the Second World War. His nephew Pierre, which was his partner before the Second World War, moved to Chandigarh to be his chef de bureau over there, because Le Corbusier had a lot of work in India. And also Alva Aalto built a white villa 40 kilometers to the west of Paris for the gallerist Louis Carré. He knew Le Corbusier, but he didn't want Le Corbusier to design his house, because he felt that he wouldn't have enough to say about how the house was going to be. Not all of the houses by Le Corbusier managed to be in good condition today. This is a house in Vaucresson, one of his first white villas. I believe it's the second one. And it looks like this today. Yeah. It is the Villa Vaucresson. As you can see by this window and this little balcony, they're still there. There were other villas, like this is a very interesting house in the northeast part of Paris, on a hill overlooking a valley at the back, by Jean Welz. That looks like this today. It's broken in two. It's hanging a little bit over. For me, it was a big inspiration, all these houses, especially Maison Verre and especially the Citroën house. And I was lucky to construct my own home here in Amsterdam. I hope I made you a little bit enthusiastic about Paris villas. So I suggest that you'll go to Paris next summer and visit at least the Villa Savoye. And if you need some help to find the right location, I suggest you visit this website, iconichouses.org. Some 150 houses are on it. So I suggest you all do that. Thank you.